When I first met Jessica, it was like something out of a movie. She was charming, smart, and could light up a room with her smile. We'd been married for 7 years, and for most of it I thought we were solid. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I was always committed to making things work. I dreamed of a family with her, a life where we'd grow old together, telling stories about how we weathered every storm. But over the past year, things began to change. At first, it was subtle, late nights at work, an unusual attachment to her phone, and a growing distance between us. She'd laugh at texts she never shared, and when I'd ask what was so funny, she'd brush me off, saying, "Oh, just a silly meme from a coworker." I tried not to overthink it. I told myself relationships go through phases, but the signs became harder to ignore. She stopped making time for us, even on weekends. Our conversations felt hollow, like she was just checking boxes. And then there was her sudden interest in looking her absolute best, new outfits, hitting the gym, expensive perfumes. All things she never cared much for before. I even suggested we go to couples counseling when I started feeling her pull away. But Jessica shot the idea down instantly. She accused me of being paranoid, overbearing, and controlling. "I need my space, Matt. Why do you always assume the worst?" She snapped at me during one of our arguments. Her defensiveness made me question myself. Was I just insecure? Was I making something out of nothing? But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't until I found her behavior growing colder, ignoring my calls, rolling her eyes during my attempts to connect, that I realized I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. My gut was screaming at me that Jessica was hiding something, but I had no idea just how deep the betrayal went. And, as I would soon find out, the truth wasn't just heartbreaking. It was infuriating. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening, one of those nights when you'd think nothing could go wrong. Jessica was out again, claiming she had a work dinner. I didn't question it at first. After all, she'd been going to these dinners more often lately, and I didn't want to spark another argument. But something gnawed at me. I decided to do what I never thought I'd do in my life. I checked her tablet. It was synced with her phone, so I figured maybe I'd find some clue, anything to put my mind at ease, or confirm my worst fears. I hated invading her privacy, but I had this sinking feeling I couldn't ignore. And there it was. A notification popped up from a messaging app one didn't recognize. Something she had apparently installed on her phone without mentioning. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. You looked amazing in that dress this morning." My stomach dropped. I scrolled through the chat history, and it only got worse. Flirty messages, inside jokes, plans to meet up, and pictures, nothing explicit, but enough to tell me this wasn't some innocent friendship. The man she was messaging was someone I'd never even heard of, a guy named Jason. The betrayal hit me like a truck. My hands were shaking as I kept scrolling, my heart pounding harder with every word I read. She was lying to me, plain and simple, and I was the fool who had trusted her every excuse. What gutted me most wasn't just the messages. It was how casually she spoke about me. In one message, Jason had asked, "Does your husband suspect anything?" And she replied with a laughing emoji, followed by, "Matt's clueless as usual." Clueless. That word stung more than I thought possible. She wasn't just cheating. She was mocking me. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen, my mind racing. I thought about every work dinner, every late night, every excuse she had ever given me. All of it was a lie. Jessica, the woman I had loved and trusted for 7 years, was having an affair right under my nose. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to feel guilty about it. I decided I couldn't confront her immediately. Not yet. I needed to know more, how long this had been going on, how deep the betrayal ran. And most importantly, I needed to figure out what to do next. So I made a plan. The next day, while Jessica was out, I went full investigator mode. I knew it wasn't healthy to dig like this, but I had to uncover the full truth. If she could be so deceitful, I needed to know the extent of her betrayal before I confronted her. First, I checked her emails. Buried among her work-related correspondence was a confirmation for a hotel reservation from 2 weeks ago. The date coincided perfectly with one of her business trips. The reservation was for 2 people. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, feeling like I couldn't breathe. It was bad enough knowing she had been sneaking around with this Jason guy, but now I had confirmation that they weren't just meeting for drinks. They were spending the night together. Next, I checked our joint bank account. Jessica had always been careful with money, but I noticed a few unexplained charges that raised red flags. Fancy restaurants I'd never heard of, spa treatments, and even a purchase at a jewelry store. Couldn't believe it. Was she buying gifts for him with our money? But the most damning discovery came from her calendar. She'd left her laptop open, and I noticed a recurring event labeled Meeting with Jay, scheduled every Thursday afternoon. It was so brazen, I almost laughed. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I felt sick. My mind raced as I pieced everything together. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment fling. This was a full-blown affair. Carefully planned, meticulously hidden, and carried out with no regard for me or our marriage. That night, I decided to test her. I told her I had a surprise dinner planned for the 2 of us and suggested we go out together. Jessica's reaction was icy. "I can't, Matt," she said curtly. "I already have plans with the girls. You should have told me earlier." Her lie was so smooth, so effortless, that it almost sounded convincing. Almost. But I knew exactly where she was going, and who she was going to see. I didn't push her. Instead, I told her to have a great time and acted like I believed every word. But inside I was seething. She had no idea I was onto her, and I intended to keep it that way for now. As she got ready that evening, applying her makeup and slipping into one of her new dresses, I couldn't help but feel a mix of heartbreak and rage. Watching her lie to my face with such ease made me realize just how little respect she had left for me. I knew the time to confront her was coming, but I wasn't ready yet. First, I needed to set my trap and make sure she couldn't worm her way out of it. The confrontation happened sooner than I had planned, but in hindsight, it was unavoidable. That Thursday, Jessica left the house with her usual excuse: another girls' night. I knew better by now. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my car keys and followed her. I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me tailing her. My heart was racing, hands gripping the wheel tighter with every turn she took. Finally, she pulled into the parking lot of an upscale restaurant, one of the places I had seen charged on our joint account. I parked a few spaces away and watched as she got out of the car, smoothing her dress and checking her reflection in the window. She wasn't meeting any girlfriends. Moments later, Jason arrived. He was tall, well-dressed, and way too smug for my liking. Jessica greeted him with a kiss on the cheek that lingered just a little too long. They walked inside together, laughing like a couple of teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs. It took everything in me not to storm in after them. But I wasn't ready to blow up just yet. I needed a plan, and I needed evidence. I snapped a few pictures from my car, capturing their little rendezvous. Then I made my way inside, careful to keep my distance. The restaurant was dimly lit, making it easy to blend in. I spotted them almost immediately, seated at a corner table, leaning in close as they talked. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. Jessica was giggling, twirling her hair like she was on a first date. Jason reached across the table to touch her hand, and she didn't pull away. I'd seen enough. My blood was boiling, and I couldn't hold back any longer. I walked straight up to their table. Jessica's face went pale the moment she saw me. "Matt, what are you doing here?" she stammered, pulling her hand away from Jason's like a guilty child caught stealing candy. "Funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Jason, to his credit, looked as shocked as she did. He started to stand, probably thinking he could intimidate me, but I wasn't in the mood. "Sit down," I barked, and he obeyed, clearly not expecting this confrontation. Jessica tried to recover, putting on her best act. "Matt, this isn't what it looks like," she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. "Oh, really?" I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the pictures I had just taken. Because it looks exactly like what I think it is. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For once, she was at a loss for words. Jason tried to chime in. Look, man, I think we should. Don't. Speak. I interrupted, my eyes never leaving Jessica. This is between me and my wife. Jessica finally snapped. You know what, Matt? Fine. Yes, I've been seeing Jason. But can you really blame me? You're boring, predictable, and honestly, I've been unhappy for years. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. But instead of breaking down, I felt something else. Clarity. Unhappy? I said, my voice low and controlled. Then why didn't you leave? Why lie, cheat, and humiliate me instead of just ending it like a decent human being? She rolled her eyes, her tone turning venomous. Because I didn't want to deal with your pity party, Matt. You always make everything about you. You're so pathetic sometimes. Jason looked like he wanted to disappear, probably realizing he'd gotten involved with a woman who had no problem tearing her husband to shreds in public. I stood there taking it all in. Her lies, her excuses, her complete lack of remorse. I realized then that this wasn't just about an affair. Jessica wasn't the woman I thought she was. She was selfish, cruel, and unworthy of my time, energy, or love. But I wasn't done yet. This confrontation was only the beginning. As I stood there in the middle of the restaurant, staring at the woman I had once thought I'd grow old with, I felt something in me snap. All the heartbreak, all the humiliation. It was like it had been building to this very moment. And now I was done playing the nice guy. Pathetic, huh? I said, my voice steady, though my hands were trembling. You call me pathetic, but you're the one sneaking around like some high school kid, lying to my face, and mocking me behind my back. You think that makes you better than me? Because it doesn't. It just makes you a coward. Jessica's expression twisted into a sneer. Oh, grow up, Matt. Not everything is about you. You're acting like I'm the villain here, but maybe if you'd been more of a man, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. That was it. The final straw. I leaned in closer, keeping my voice low so only she and Jason could hear me. You know what, Jessica? You're right. I am done acting like everything is about me. So, let's make this about you for once. I turned to Jason, who was shrinking into his seat. Enjoy your dinner, buddy, I said, because it's on her. Then to Jessica, oh, and don't worry about coming home tonight. You'll find your things packed and waiting for you on the curb tomorrow morning. Her face went pale again, but before she could respond, I walked away. I could hear her calling after me, her voice shrill and desperate, but I didn't look back. When I got outside, I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt tight, but I didn't cry. I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry, and I was determined to take back control of my life. That's when the idea hit me, the divorce letter. I drove straight to a friend's house, someone I trusted completely, and told him everything. I asked if I could crash there for the night, and he agreed without hesitation. Then, I pulled out my laptop and started drafting the letter. But this wasn't going to be a simple, straightforward, I want a divorce kind of letter. No, this was going to be the ultimate mic drop. I poured all my frustration, my anger, and my heartbreak into it. I detailed exactly how I found out about her affair, how I had followed her to the restaurant, and how I had confronted her. I ended the letter with a single sentence that made my intentions clear. By the time you read this, you'll know exactly what kind of person you've chosen to be. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a different man. The heartbreak was still there, simmering under the surface, but it was overshadowed by a newfound clarity. I wasn't going to let Jessica's betrayal define me. I printed out the divorce letter and placed it in an envelope, making sure my handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Then, I called the restaurant where she and Jason had been laughing over their little date the night before. Hi, I said to the manager, feigning politeness. I believe my wife left something important on your table last night. She'll be dining there again this evening. Could I drop it off for her to find? The manager agreed, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. By mid-afternoon, I drove to the restaurant, handing the envelope to the staff with instructions to place it on the reserve table. As I walked out, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and nervous anticipation. Tonight was going to be unforgettable, for her at least. That evening, I stayed parked down the block, waiting for Jessica to arrive. Sure enough, at precisely 7 p.m., her car pulled into the lot. She stepped out, dressed to the nines, and sauntered inside. A few minutes later, Jason showed up, his smug demeanor as nauseating as ever. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. This was their moment, and I wanted them to have the full, uninterrupted experience. Inside, as Jessica and Jason settled into their seats, the waiter handed her the envelope. She looked confused at first, then intrigued, as she opened it. Her face twisted into a mask of horror as she read the first few lines. Jason, oblivious, asked, "What's that?" Her voice wavered as she stammered, It's nothing. Just something Matt left for me." But Jason wasn't buying it. He leaned over to read the letter, and that's when the fireworks began. "What the hell is this?" Jason demanded, his voice carrying across the restaurant. Jessica tried to grab the letter back, but it was too late. Jason had read enough to understand the situation, and his role in it. He slammed the letter onto the table, his face turning red with anger. "You didn't tell me your husband knew," he hissed, loud enough that several diners turned to look. Jessica's attempt to calm him down only made things worse. "Jason, please, it's not that big a deal. I can explain." But Jason wasn't having it. "Not that big a deal? Are you kidding me? You dragged me into this mess. And now your husband knows everything? What kind of game are you playing, Jessica?" The rest of the confrontation was a blur of shouting, accusations, and Jessica's increasingly desperate attempts to salvage the situation. From my car, I could see other diners turning to watch the drama unfold, their faces a mix of shock and amusement. I didn't stick around to see how it ended. I had seen enough. As I drove away, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. Jessica had wanted to live a double life, to have her cake and eat it too. But now, her carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling, and she only had herself to blame. The next morning, I woke up feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. But another part of me was still simmering with anger. I knew Jessica wouldn't take what happened lying down. Sure enough, by midday, my phone started blowing up. Text after text from Jessica, alternating between rage, fake apologies, and outright insults. "How could you humiliate me like that? You're such a coward for not talking to me face to face. You've ruined everything, Matt." I didn't respond. Not a single word. Let her stew in her mess. Then came the voicemails. She was crying in one, screaming in another, and then trying to sound calm and reasonable in the next. It was a circus of emotions, and I wasn't buying any of it. I let them all go to voicemail. Her words weren't worth my time. But what I wasn't expecting was for Jason to call me. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but when I picked up, his voice came through, bitter and full of venom. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he spat. "I don't think," I said calmly. "I know." He launched into a tirade, accusing me of ruining his relationship with Jessica, calling me names, and even threatening to come to my house to settle this like men. I couldn't help but laugh. "Jason," I said, cutting him off mid-rant, "if you're dumb enough to fight over a woman who lied to both of us, then be my guest. But don't expect me to care." He hung up after that. Good riddance. Jessica, of course, wasn't done. That evening, she showed up at the house, banging on the door and demanding to talk. I almost didn't answer, but I figured it was better to deal with her now than let her escalate things further. When I opened the door, she stormed in, her face red with anger. "What the hell is wrong with you, Matt?" she shouted. "You didn't have to embarrass me like that." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Embarrass you?" I repeated, Jessica, you humiliated yourself the moment you decided to cheat on me. Don't blame me for cleaning up your mess. She rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, please, you're acting like some saint. Do you even know how hard it was for me to stay in this marriage? You're boring, Matt. You don't excite me anymore. Jason gave me what I needed, and you couldn't. Her words stung, but I refused to let her see it. You know what's really boring, Jessica? I shot back. Lies, deception, sneaking around like a teenager instead of acting like an adult. You don't want excitement. You want chaos, and I'm done being dragged into it. She scoffed, crossing her arms. So what now? You're just going to leave me? Throw away everything we've built? I laughed bitterly. Jessica, you already threw it away the moment you climbed into bed with Jason. I'm just making it official. I handed her a folder with the divorce papers I'd had drawn up that morning. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. You can't be serious, she muttered, her voice trembling. Oh, I'm dead serious, I said, my tone cold. And don't think you're walking away with half of everything. I've got proof of your affair, and I'm not afraid to use it in court. For the first time, Jessica looked genuinely panicked. She tried to argue, tried to manipulate me into reconsidering, but I was done listening. You've made your choices, Jessica, I said firmly. Now you get to live with them. I opened the door, gesturing for her to leave. She stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As I locked the door, I felt a strange sense of closure. Jessica might have been the one to break our vows, but I was the one taking control of my life again. After Jessica stormed out, I expected things to calm down, but I underestimated how low she could go. Over the next few days, she launched a smear campaign against me, trying to make herself the victim. She told mutual friends that I was emotionally abusive, that I had driven her into Jason's arms, and that I was overreacting to a so-called mistake. Some friends believed her, others didn't, but the whispers were infuriating. The audacity of her to flip the narrative after everything she had done made my blood boil. If she wanted to play dirty, I decided I could play dirtier. It was time for Jessica to face the full consequences of her actions. First, I sent copies of the evidence of her affair, texts, photos, and that lovely hotel receipt, to her family. Her parents had always liked me and thought the world of Jessica, but when they saw the proof, their tune changed. Her mother called me in tears, apologizing for Jessica's behavior. Her father was less emotional. He simply said, "I'm sorry, Matt. She embarrassed us all. I didn't enjoy hurting them, but Jessica needed to see that her lies and deceit affected more than just me." Then I turned my attention to Jason. I knew he worked for a small tech company, and thanks to Jessica's loose lips during one of our few amicable conversations early in our marriage, I knew exactly who his boss was. I sent the same evidence package to Jason's workplace, complete with a note explaining how he had been having an affair with a married woman while on company time. It didn't take long for the fallout to hit. Jason called me furious. "You got me fired, you piece of shit," he shouted. "Not my problem," I said calmly. "Maybe you should have thought about that before sleeping with another man's wife." Then I hung up, but I wasn't done yet. I had one last card to play, a little cherry on top of my revenge sundae. Jessica had always prided herself on her social circle, a group of well-to-do women who thrived on gossip and appearances. I knew she'd been bragging about her perfect marriage for years, even while carrying on her affair with Jason, so I made sure the evidence of her betrayal found its way into that circle as well. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica had been uninvited from a charity event she had been organizing. Her so-called friends were quick to turn on her, and she was left scrambling to do damage control. The reputation she had worked so hard to maintain was crumbling, piece by piece. As for me, I felt lighter with every step I took away from the chaos she had created. Jessica had made her bed. Now she had to lie in it, alone. The final nail in the coffin came a week later when I saw her at the courthouse for our first divorce hearing. She looked tired, worn down and defeated. Gone was the smug, self-assured woman who had laughed at me behind my back. In her place was someone who was finally facing the consequences of her actions. She tried one last time to appeal to me, pulling me aside before we went in. "Matt, can we just talk? I made a mistake, okay? We can work this out." I looked her in the eyes, my voice steady and firm. "You didn't make a mistake, Jessica. You made a choice. And now I'm making mine." I walked away, leaving her standing there as the realization set in. There was no going back. The day the divorce was finalized felt like a rebirth. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a strange sense of calm, as if the weight of Jessica's lies and betrayal had finally lifted off my shoulders. She barely looked at me during the hearing, her usual arrogance replaced with quiet resignation. I think she finally realized there was no manipulating her way out of this. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, hobbies, and reconnecting with friends I had drifted away from during my marriage. I even started going to the gym, a place Jessica used to mock me for avoiding. Each weight I lifted felt like a step further from the pain and closer to the man I wanted to be. But the emotional scars didn't fade overnight. There were nights when I'd sit alone in the house, staring at the empty space where her things used to be, wondering how someone I loved could hurt me so deeply. The memories of her laughter, her touch, her promises, they haunted me. But every time they surfaced, I reminded myself of the truth. She wasn't the woman I thought she was. One evening, I got a message from a mutual friend. They sent me a screenshot of a post Jessica had made online, some vague, self-pitying rant about how people don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. I didn't respond. It wasn't worth my time or energy. As for Jason, I heard through the grapevine that his life had fallen apart, too. He'd lost his job, his reputation, and apparently, his fling with Jessica wasn't enough to sustain a real relationship. The two of them had cut ties shortly after the restaurant fiasco. Karma works in funny ways, I suppose. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that trust is everything in a relationship. Without it, love doesn't stand a chance. Jessica's betrayal taught me to pay attention to the red flags, to trust my instincts, and most importantly, to never settle for less than I deserve. For anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, here's my advice. Don't let anyone treat you like you're disposable. If you suspect something is wrong, don't ignore it. And when the truth comes out, don't let their lies and excuses manipulate you into staying in a toxic situation. You deserve better. Looking back now, I don't regret what happened. As painful as it was, it taught me resilience. It showed me that I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. Jessica tried to break me, but instead, she gave me the clarity I needed to walk away and start fresh. And if I'm being honest, seeing her face when she opened that divorce letter at the restaurant, that moment will always bring a small, satisfying smile to my face. Now, as I sit here writing this, I feel hopeful for the first time in a long time. The future is wide open, and I'm ready to embrace it, with or without someone by my side. For now, I'm just focused on me, and that's more than enough.